Welcome to the promised land. We are in applied optimization section 2.9. This is where we're going to start using derivatives to solve some more interesting problems. Now, the bad news is that the most interesting problems are just so incredibly complicated that I'm not going to make you do them, and we're not really going to cover them here, but we'll talk about medium interesting problems at least, all right? So this first video is kind of just a little introduction, talk about what we're doing and how to best approach it. The next video is when we really start solving some problems. So I want to start by saying that most of the time, the hardest part of any person who does math, I don't mean mathematician like professional mathematician, I mean anybody who does math, is the hardest part of that job is just to write the problem in math. Okay? So like we're going to be answering questions along the lines of this. Like this is usually how questions get asked. And then the math part is putting this question into math. How do we write this as an equation? Solving an equation, eventually you get good enough at that, no problem. But putting these things into equations, that is always hard forever, which may not be the good news that you want to hear, but it's true for me too. Okay? So we could be asking questions like, what's the quickest way to drop off all those packages, right? We're minimizing the time taken. What's the best way to organize a schedule to not waste time? You could like say we're maximizing like time utilization, we're maximizing resources, we're minimizing waste. A couple of ways to frame that one is a really messy problem, but of course, these are all very important questions for any business owner to know, especially for like big businesses. This is essentially related to the traveling salesman problem, which is a really famous traveling salesman problem is what I said. Really famous math problem for how hard it is to actually solve. But it's a very common problem, right? Like, delivery drivers, UPS, USPS, all that stuff, right? They need to answer that question. They don't need the perfect mathematical minimum, but they don't want to waste time, right? What's the cheapest way to do this task, right? That's minimizing cost. That's optimization, applied optimization. Okay, and this really goes into this big, long rabbit hole. We're going to be doing some simple functions. But in reality, we have really complicated functions with lots of variables, lots of inequalities, and some eventually, like this class is just simple functions, but eventually, right, if you want to really answer these questions really effectively, you have so many variables, you have so many equations, you have inequalities, and eventually there's something called stochastic optimization, which is what I did in grad school, where things are random. So you don't even know what the cost is going to be. It's a random variable. And then you have to deal with like expected value and distributions and stuff like that. But we're just tip of the iceberg here. Okay. But there's some really fantastic, fun stuff. This is what got me into math. Okay. So I'm into math because I like answering these questions. So let's stop talking about me and things that I like, and let's start talking about what you need to know. So we got some definitions that you may have heard before. I know if you were in my business pre-calculus class that you have seen these for sure, and many other business pre-calculus classes will have talked about them. We're going to talk about objective functions and constraint equations. So when we're trying to maximize something, right, or minimize something, the objective function is just what we're trying to minimize. So we'll have some kind of equation for time here, or we'll have some kind of cost function. That's what the objective function refers to. What are we trying to minimize or maximize? Constraint equations are just the rules that we have to follow. So for, what's the quickest way to drop off all these packages? We want to minimize the time it takes, but, we can't just teleport, and, we have certain other requirements. We have to go from one to another, and then we have to go through all the spots and stuff like that. And writing those as equations is really hard too. But we'll be doing things not so bad, but that's what those words mean: objective function, constraint equations. So we have some general steps. I'm not a big step-by-step kind of guy myself, but I'm including these for you because different people learn and do problems differently. Okay. So ideally, we'll start by drawing a picture. If you can, anytime you can draw a picture, it's going to be really helpful. And then try to write things in math. Take a picture, try to turn it in math. This is usually going to be the hardest part. And then we'll try to figure out, okay, what is our objective function? What is its domain as well? Remember, domain are the inputs. That makes sense. So if we're, trying to figure out, how big we should build something, it can't be negative. And there's also a certain maximum bigness as well, right? We can't have a building that reaches to the moon. So we'll figure out our domain. If there's multiple variables, we'll need to get some constraint equations. We'll solve those constraint equations and then substitute to get rid of one of the variables. Okay, well, kind of like the substitution method for systems of equations. This right here is the only calculus step of this entire section, is just finding global extrema, which we did in the last section, 2.7. So this is the only calculus. All the difficult stuff in this section is not going to be calculus. All right, the only calculus is just finding global extrema, which really is not even that much calculus. It's checking the endpoints and the critical points and just picking the biggest or the smallest. And then make sure to look over the original problem. Make sure we're answering, it's easy to forget what we're actually doing, right? What are we actually trying to answer? What question is being asked? And then we'll convert math back into English and then double check that our answer makes sense. And we're not saying that we're going to build a building that's 2 inches tall. We're going to make sense that we're saying we're not going to optimize our profits by producing one item. That would be silly. We're not optimizing our profits by selling 2.735 items. That doesn't really make sense either. Stuff like that. Okay, so this is the general outline. This is what we're going to be doing. Just a little introduction video, just kind of tell you where we're at and some context for some of the cool stuff that's involved in this section. The rest of the sections will be lots of problem solving. This is all you need to know, but we'll do hopefully lots of practice. Bye-bye.